today, I invite you to stand with me. We've been working on learning this song, Blessed Be Your Name. So I invite you to stand with me because today you're going to sing the whole ball of wax from beginning to end. So give it your best shot. There are choir members who are not in the choir loft who are out there amongst you, so they'll sing real loud and help you out. Let us join our hearts and voices in Blessed Be Your Name. Blessed be your name in the land that is plentiful, where streams of abundance. Let's stop. It would be really helpful if there were words. Let's stop. Just let me know whenever. Oh, that's okay. That happens. Oh, yeah. There's a lot of words, so it would be good if you could see it. We'll get figured out. I think. Anybody know any good jokes? Hey, there we are. Take two. Can we try this again? In the land
morning. I'd like to welcome this morning, up in the balcony, Cindy Elmore, who's going to be our speaker today. Cindy is with the Virginia Foundation, and she's been with them, Virginia Baptist Foundation, and she's been with them since 2011. And she now serves as Director of Development and travels throughout Southwest Virginia from their Roanoke office. She helps donors and churches find ways to multiply their ministry dollars, and she's with us today to help us kick off our 2019 stewardship emphasis. Cindy holds a master's degree in public administration from Virginia Commonwealth University, and she has 25 years experience in public relations, marketing, and fundraising, and she's married to Joe, who I found out this morning is pastor at Roslyn Hills Baptist Church in Roanoke, and he's been pastoring in Virginia for 17 years. And she loves watching Auburn University football and eating Alabama peaches. Is that right, Cindy? Read it right off of the website. So welcome, and we enjoyed having you in Sunday school this morning, too. So with that, let's go to the Lord with a word of prayer. Almighty God, we stand amazed in your presence this morning as we consider how generously you pour out your love. Also your blessings, and help us to focus on the trust that you have placed in us to serve as your hands and feet, to spread this love in our communities, in our state, in our country, and even in the world. Now remove all of our distractions as we enter into worship with you. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
So Cindy, having grown up in North Alabama, I'll join you on the eating Alabama peach thing, but I can't go with you on the Auburn football watching. Sorry about that. So, everybody's got feet of clay, so I guess that's okay. We love Auburn people anyhow. All that thrills my soul is Jesus, not football anyway, right? Jesus. Let us sing about that. It's 526 if you'd like to use the hymn book. Who can cheer the heart like Please be seated.
Good morning. A few weeks ago, I met with Bryon and had a few pictures and statements and some information about this church that was from my grandparents that I had found a good many years ago. And one of those is pretty interesting. I'm going to show that to you in just a few minutes. But I just want to say that how fortunate we are to be in this beautiful building. Probably the most beautiful church campus in Buena Vista, okay? But it's 92 years old. The Sunday school is 60 plus years old. The parsonage is 65 years plus old. Now, our pledges go to pay salaries, insurance, lights, gas, whatever, mowing the grass. We've got a big obligation in this church to maintain this building in the order that it should be. I'm on the Buildings and Grounds team. And it's Harold as chairman, and Billy, Brenda, Jackie, and Melvin. And it's hard to keep this church in the shape that it should be in. Really hard. So let me just show you this slide here. Now, J.J. Bates is my grandfather. Now, I'm not showing you that slide because he's my grandfather. I'm showing you that slide because 92 years ago, a lot of people took on the same obligation that he did to build this building. Now, if you look over there on the payroll side, Granddaddy worked at Columbia Paper Mill. John Bates. Paid 42 cents an hour. That's $840 a year. And hundreds of people in this town made that same amount of money, and they probably done the same thing. He pledged $65 to build this building. Now, you know what this is over here? New Baptist Church building. You know what that is? That's a bill. Maybe a kinder word would be a notice of how much he owes, what he's paid, and what he owes. Now, it's maybe a half a dozen of us in the building right now that can trace our membership back to this date. But just think of all those people that worked so hard and gave so much to have this building. So, what I'm going to say next might sound a little negative, so I want to start out on a positive count. We've done something over the last couple of years to keep this building in the shape it should be in, and that's this organ. We should be so proud that we've got this organ here. But let me tell you something that needs to be done and something that has happened recently. Last fall, early last winter, we had a cold day in the church. That was because an actuator valve, that's a big word, but it's an electric-powered valve, and when that thermostat calls for heat, that valve opens up and lets steam come in. It quit working. You know how much it cost? $1,600. Now, how can the Buildings and Ground team obligate our church to paint the parsonage, which it needs, or to paint the front of the church up here, which hadn't been painted for 10 years, and I don't know when the parsonage was painted last. But we have to go out on a limb, for not a better word, and hire somebody to do that. And then we hope that something don't break in the meantime, that we have to pay for that and drop the project to paint part of the church. So these are things that we are challenged with every month we meet. Now, here's another situation that we're dealing with. You know, in 2017, the last quarter, we had to freeze our budget because of our income. 2018, we adjusted our budget to match what we had frozen in 2017. Now, this is what I'm going to say maybe is negative. Since last January 2018, starting in January, the pledges that we had signed, our pledge cards, were $1,000 a month less than what that pledge was. January through August. $8,000. And then the last quarter of 2018, our giving was $1,500 less per month than what had been pledged. To sum that all up, our income in 2018 was $17,000 less than what we had pledged. So you can see how hard it is to obligate ourselves to paint our building, paint our parsonage, and do whatever else maintenance needs to be done. And we owe it to this church and to those guys to keep this church up and do our best to honor what we pledge every year. Now, my grandfather joined his church in 1909. Counting how long I've been here, my family's been in this church 110 years. And some other people in here have the same thing. And to know what my grandfather gave, as well as a lot of other people, we just can't imagine him doing. My grandfather, he came born right over across the mountain at Panther Falls. Couldn't read and write, but he sure could count money. My grandmother, born at Springwood in Buchanan County. She came to Buena Vista. Married my grandfather, had my mother. I love him. Now, something else that I'm really proud of. Me, I am 7th generation in northern Rockbridge, southern Augusta County. My 4th grandfather is buried in New Providence Church Cemetery. My 3rd and 1st great-grandfathers are buried in Old Providence Church Cemetery. My 2nd great-grandfather is buried in Mount Carmel Church Cemetery. I'll ask you 2 questions. Y'all know what denomination those churches are. You don't have to answer that. But where am I standing today? A Baptist church because of these people. So I'm honored to be here. I urge you to think over the stewardship program that we have and do your best to keep this church in the condition that it deserves to be in. Thank you. Where's Larry?
Well, I just found out something. I'm a newbie. I've only been in this church 50 years. As we enter a time of prayer, there's several things that we need to be aware of, but I first want to remind each of you here, and if there's any who's not attending Sunday school, next Sunday will be an opportune time to start. We'll be having a Sunday school assembly, and for this morning and last week, we were having a sharing time in each of the Sunday school classes to reflect and share times when God has been miraculous in our personal lives and when God has been miraculous in the life of this church. See the slide up there? You know, there's been a lot of work put into this church, but and it has a great witness. God has blessed this church many times. God has put people here at particular times for particular reasons, and He's put each of us here at this time for a particular reason. So keep that in mind. Next Sunday, 10 o'clock, Sunday school classes will be ready to come to the fellowship hall downstairs. We will have refreshments provided by the mixed couples class. So it'll be coffee and juices and pastries. So just if you're not coming to Sunday school, just get up a little bit early and come on next week. And I think you'll find a warm, rich time of sharing with our church family. As we enter this time of prayer this morning, we have several. I encourage you to take a look at your bulletin and the list of the prayer requests and the family and friends that's in the bulletin this week. Also, ask you to be mindful of Clyde Moore's family. His sister Millie Pitzenberger passed away. Funeral services will be tomorrow at Harrison's 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock. And also, Clyde's sister Hazel fell and broke her hip this week too. So please keep Clyde's family in your prayers. Also need to remember Bryon and Annie on their trip back from the West Coast today. So if you would, take a few moments and let's go to the Lord in prayer. Our Heavenly Father, we do thank you for this day. We thank you for each and every one who is here in this house to worship you today. We thank you for the history of this church and the past members of this church who have witnessed and contributed and given of their time and talents that we would have this opportunity to be here today. For those families who have special needs, that you would be ever close to them, touch them, that they may feel your love in their time of need. We pray for every part of this church as we move forward through our Sunday schools and other small groups that they will have their hearts open and ready to carry your light through this community. These things we pray in thy name. Amen.
Each week of the stewardship emphasis looks at a different biblical account, different biblical story with which we are familiar. This one, Peter walked on the water, was what I was given for today's emphasis. And so you recall that story, that event, that as long as Peter's focus was on Jesus in that event, he was walking on the water. But as soon as he began to question what was going on, as soon as he began to trust in his own ability and not so much of that in Jesus, take his eyes off of Jesus, he began to sink. And so finding another song with which we're familiar that uses the same kind of water metaphor, that if we are focused on Jesus, we are able to accomplish that to which he has called us. And if we're focused on ourselves, we won't. Let's just put it in that simple context. Love Lifted Me is that very song. I invite you to stand with me as we sing that and recount that. 505 if you want to use the book. storms of life are raging, stand by me. When the storms of life are raging, stand by me. When the world is tossing me like a ship upon the sea, thou who rulest wind and water, stand by me. In the midst of tribulation, stand by me. In the midst of tribulation, stand by me. When the hosts of sin assail and my strength begins to fail, thou who never lost a battle, stand by me. In the midst of faults and failures, stand by me. In the midst of faults and failures, stand by me. When I've done the best I can, and my friends misunderstand, thou who knowest all about me, stand by me. Thou who never lost a battle, stand by me. Thou who rulest wind and water, stand by me.
Okay, guys, don't make me have a heart attack. They promised me they're going to get this all to work. Well, I'm so happy to be here, and I'm really happy to help you kick off your Stewardship Sunday. And it was so great to see the history, some of the history of the church and how people sacrificially gave. And when you figure out that percentage that those people were giving, that was remarkable. And so at the foundation, we've created a stewardship curriculum, and it's called Miraculous Generosity. And so this week is the first week of it, and so your pastor will continue the next 3 weeks after this. So the first week, indeed, is the story of Jesus Walks on the Waters. So these guys are really going to try to play the video. So this is the first part of it, and let's see how it goes.
Hey, today we're in Southwest Virginia, right on the shore of South Holston Lake. I've been to this lake hundreds of times, but one story about this lake stands out to me more than any other. When I was a boy, probably early teens, we were out on the lake, we were behind the boat being pulled on the tube. You know how that goes. We're just having the greatest time ever. And another group of guys pulled up beside our boat, and they said, "Hey guys, why don't we all go down to the cliff and jump off the cliff?" That sounded like a great idea to a bunch of guys, so sure enough, we get our boats and we head down to the cliff, and I remember seeing that cliff. It stands out in the middle of the lake, and the closer we got to it, it seemed like the higher it got. We finally jumped out of the boat, we swim over to the edge of the cliff, and we go through some briars, and we get up to the edge of the cliff. Now it looks like it's forever, 35 feet or so. And my best friend, he doesn't even think about it. He just jumps off the edge of the cliff down into the lake. I'm thinking, that guy's crazy. My heart is racing. You know how it goes. and I'm afraid with everything within me. But I knew if I thought about it very much, I'll never jump. And so I took a good run ago, and I jumped as fast and as hard as I can and landed in the lake, and we had the best time ever. You know what that story tells me? Sometimes you just have to face your fears, embrace the adventure, and take a leap of faith. Do you not? And that takes me to the story in Matthew 14 that Jesus is out on the shore, he's praying, and all of his disciples on the Sea of Galilee, much like where we are today. And a storm comes up in the middle of the night. And while they're out in this storm, they get fearful. They become afraid. And in their fear, Jesus knows they're afraid. And so he comes to them walking on the water. And as he comes to them walking on the water, they look out of the boat, and in the lightning and the thunder and the waves, they see Jesus. And who among all the disciples jump out of the boat? None other than Peter. Man, can't we identify with Peter? All of us can identify with Peter. He's just an ordinary guy, just like you and me. And he takes a step of faith, and he jumps out of the boat. And here's the deal. He actually walks on water, a miracle, toward Jesus. Pretty incredible, isn't it, what God can do when we take a step of faith? Well, you know the story. He begins to look at all of his surroundings like we often do, and he begins to sink. But hey, don't be too hard on Peter. None of those 11 guys took a step of faith, did they? They're all in the boat. And Jesus comes and rescues Peter, takes him back to the boat, and the storm ceases. It's pretty miraculous when Jesus gets a hold of our life, and he honors when we take a step of faith toward him. You know what I've learned about my faith journey in my life? This is always true. When we offer the gift of faith, the Lord provides miraculous opportunity.
So that was Alan Jesse. He is the pastor of the largest Virginia Baptist church, and this morning they probably have about 10,000 people. So that's why I had to bring somebody who knew what they're doing, because I don't know what I'm doing. I normally sit on the back row of the church while my husband speaks. So anyways, I put this slide up here. I just wanted you to see that, you know, this story of Peter, of Jesus walking on the water, the story is mainly told in Matthew. And then if you look in Mark and John, there's a few more details. But the things that a lot of times we don't think about, or I've been thinking about a lot lately, is, you know, Jesus told those guys to row out into the boat, and he went to pray. And I thought about, you know, why, if he knew that it was going to be a storm, why did he send them into a storm? And, you know, that's what happens to us a lot of times. We're sitting there, and we're in the middle of a storm, and we ask God, why are we in this storm? Well, the truth to it is that we're in the storm because he's trying to build our faith. He's trying to build us to make us more like him. So if you look at the next verse, I put in there, it's called Faith Under Pressure. Consider it a sheer gift, friends, when tests and challenges come at you from all sides. You know that under pressure, your faith life is forced into the open and shows its true colors. So don't try to get out of anything prematurely. Let it do its work so you can become mature and well-developed, not deficient in any way. So in those verses in James, they tell us what I'm trying to say. You know, God puts us in those storms that to make us more like him, to make us be able to give something to him. So when we talk about the gift of faith, God is giving us faith. He's developing the faith in our lives, but then he's helping us to give it back and help others. So I wanted to tell you a couple of little stories about people that have worked with the foundation that I would say are people that are of great faith. But the one thing about every one of these people is each and every one of these people have had some really tough, bad thing happen to them. And I'm sure you know these guys that were on the list up here of the names of people that used to be in this church. I bet if you knew what was going on in their life, that they'd been through a lot. It wasn't easy for them to choose to give a large percentage of their salary back to the church. But they've had something that was in their life that molded them and made them that way. So that's what happened with Maud. Maud had a situation where she was just a secretary. Her husband sold insurance, and her husband died very suddenly. And then she had a daughter, and she raised her daughter, she thought, to be perfect, dance, art, everything. And her daughter became addicted to alcohol, and her daughter ended up passing away from cirrhosis of the liver. So Maud outlived her daughter by 30 years, and so she was alone. But Maud was determined. Maud was from Grundy. Anybody ever Grundy, Virginia? She was from Grundy, so she knew some hard times growing up, but she knew some hard times throughout her life. But she was passionate about education, and she was very passionate because she wanted her daughter to turn out so well. So what Maud did was, in her will, she left her estate, her entire estate, to Bluefield College. And her estate, because she had saved and scrimped and lived very modestly, was $650,000. So she gave a large percentage of what she gave and earned in her life back so that kids could go to Bluefield College. So since that money is with the foundation, it'll be invested, and it'll go on, and it'll continue to help kids in Southwest Virginia to get an education. So the next person we talk about is Artwell Pierce. And Mr. Pierce died last week. And I went to the viewing for his funeral. I went yesterday, I believe. So I drove to Chesapeake and came back. But he was a wonderful man. But he also had something hard happen to him. He said it changed his life. He was in the military, so he had some tough times then. But his wife, Stella, who he adored, he could tell you what she had on the first time that he saw her, the exact skirt. But Stella had had a tough life too. She went to college, and when she went to college, she had no money, not a dime. And so, but miraculously, people gave to her and paid for her to go to college. So when she passed away about 20, 30 years before Mr. Pierce, because Mr. Pierce was 94 and a half when he passed away this week, he decided that he wanted to do something in honor of Stella. And so Stella was so passionate again about education. So he started a scholarship, and he would give a little bit of money each quarter so that students would have that money. So he's down from Chesapeake. So through his association now, kids can apply to receive scholarships. But even though he had a hard life, he didn't make it bitter. He didn't make that losing his wife a bitter thing. He turned it into a good thing and was able to give back to help other people. Then the next person is Bill Gwathmey. So Bill Gwathmey is in Walkerton, and Bill Gwathmey is 98 years old. So he was in World War II, and then World War II, he had a lot of tough times. He was at Virginia Tech. It wasn't Virginia Tech then, but he was in his senior year, and so they said, you're not going to finish your senior year, you're going to go off to war. So he was 21 years old. He went off to war, and he commanded troops of like 38 people. And so he said that they had some really, really tough times because he was at the Battle of the Bulge, and his feet would freeze and all these things, you know. But one thing that happened to him, he said that there was a German fighter plane when they were walking through France with this group of people, that a German fighter plane came through and bombed them. And he said it wasn't they were bombing them, it's just they would go on a bombing run, and then they would come back, and then they would just drop all of their leftover artillery on people. So he said he jumped into the snow, and he just prayed, Lord, please don't let me die. And he said that this peace came over him, like the Bible talks about a peace that passes all understanding, that peace came over him, and he knew that everything was going to be all right. And he said, I knew that I was going to live a long life, and I felt like that God had a purpose for my life. And he said, you know, a lot of bad things happened to me. This is one thing I found out about people that have lived 98 years. They have bad things happen to them. So they can either choose to be happy about it and understand that that's was God's will for their life, or they can become bitter people. But he chose to be happy about it. One horrible thing that happened, his wife, who he met her before he went off to war, and when he got back from the war, he saw her getting on a bus in Richmond in Broad Street and tracked her down, ran after her, and they were married within a year. So he just loved her dearly. But she was involved in their church, and their church is 3 miles away from their house. And so she was working in the clothing closet, and she was driving home from the clothing closet, and a tree fell on her car and killed her. So, you know, a lot of people would be like really upset and mad, but it didn't. That's not, it made his faith stronger. He became a strong person of faith. And so from that point on, Mr. Wathme, their church was built in the 1700s, late 1700s. So it is a really, really old church. So what you're saying about, you know, need money to keep the church up, that's a lot of what he's done. So through the years, he's given money to help with their church, but also he's created a trust, and in this trust, it helps with the building of the church. And so, you know, the money's at the foundation, and the money is invested, and then we make a payout to the church, and it helps with the building. But so instead of like, you know, having these hard storm come into his life and feeling like, you know, I hate God, I'm going to turn my back on God, he embraced it and believed that that's what God had for his life. I don't know who the next person is, guys. You got to tell me. This is Mr. Bobby Gentry, and Bobby Gentry lives in Charlottesville. And Bobby had a hard time his whole life because he was so dyslexic that he was never able to read. So he wasn't able to, he somehow graduated from high school and went to Bluefield College, but he couldn't finish. So due to that, since he couldn't read, he couldn't get a great job, he went to work with his uncle. And he ended up being the breeder for Secretariat. So even though he couldn't read, he could breed racehorses. And so his horse run big time, won the Triple Crown. But you know, Bobby, again, he's a very positive person, and he could have, that fact that he could never read and the embarrassment he said, and kids laughed at him, he never let that get to him. So his uncle passed away that he bred the horses with, and his uncle had a house. And Bobby was like, Cindy, I didn't need a house. And so what he did was he gave the house to the foundation. The foundation sold it. And in selling it, they created a trust, which is income producing. So Bobby and his wife Joyce, they used to get a check quarterly as a payout. But then they decided that, no, we don't even need the money. We would rather just keep the money in the trust, because they wanted the money to go, in their passing, they wanted it to go to their church, First Baptist Church Charlottesville, and then they wanted it to go to Samaritan's Purse, but they wanted it to go to the community college because two of their children also were dyslexic and were able to go to the community college, and so they wanted to give back to that. So instead of hating life because he had this dyslexia that was so severe that he couldn't read, he embraced it, found the thing that God wanted him to do, God blessed that, and he stepped out on faith and then gave it back to God. The next couple, this is Don and Eileen Pitts, and they're from Sparta, but they grew up in Pennsylvania. They were high school sweethearts, and when they graduated from high school, they got married, and they had zero Zippo money. So he got a job at a funeral home, and so that was really hard, but he made the best of it. Through that, he learned the insurance business. Through that, he learned to sell real estate, and then he became a commercial real estate developer. So his life seemed so golden, because in the background of this picture, you can see they have like this big pond there, and people go there and swim, get baptized there. It is like unbelievable. It's huge. And so one of the hardest things that he and his wife told me, and when they both told me this, their voices they quivered because their grandson was killed in a car accident. And so it was like that pain just always was so real, and it's just like it fresh, it never really healed. But they went through that struggle. They faced that storm just like Peter and the disciples were facing that storm. But instead of letting that hurt them, they grew in faith, and then they turned around and they helped so many people. He created a donor advised fund at the foundation, which is an opportunity for people to create a fund that's invested and they can give to lots of different nonprofits. So his church quarterly gets a tithe from him, and believe you me, their church is an old church too, and they really, really need it to keep their building up, and other ministries that they do. But he also was involved in missions and just lots of different things. He gave to the rescue squad and all those kind of things. But instead of letting that pain that he had felt, that storm that he experienced to the death of his grandchild, he didn't let that happen. He faced that storm, his faith grew, and he stepped out on faith and did something big. And the next lady is Joyce Elstock. And Joyce is also a person who has gone through a lot in her life. But it's unique how things worked out. So when she was 19 years old, her father had put their family farm up, got a loan for it to do a bus company. Well, his bus company went bankrupt, and he was going to lose the farm. So they were going to auction off the farm. So Joyce, at 19 years old, went to the bank and asked the bank if they would loan her the money to buy the farm. So she went to the auction. They said yes. She went to the auction, and none of her neighbors bid against her. So here she is at 19 years old, and she saved her family farm, where her great-grandparents, her great-great-grandparents, her grandparents, they had all been on that farm. And so then she ended up getting married, and she moved to Alexandria. That was in Spotsylvania County. And so she had a lot of tough things. I mean, she had a brain tumor, and when she had a brain tumor, they told her that she would not survive it. She did survive it. While she was being treated for the brain tumor, her husband had a heart attack. He was a fireman, and he passed away. But, I mean, if you talk to Joyce today, she is one of the most joyful people that you've ever met, because those storms that she went through, they increased her faith. They drew her closer to Jesus. And for that reason, she's willing to give. Now, we're going to see if this next little clip of Joyce, this is her talking about what she went through. She ended up giving her farm to the foundation and creating a trust to help her church and SBCA and one other thing. I don't remember right now. Let's see if we can get it.
And, I suppose anyone has a piece of property that's had some longevity. It's had some family heritage. It's going to be difficult to say goodbye to that piece of property. My neighbor and I, we've been going through the belongings of the household for the last 2 or 3 years, and that's conjured up some emotion. But it's I think the emotion of knowing that your grandfather, grandmother, mother, father, family lived here, and now it's going to go bye-bye. And yes, that brings up the emotion. And yet I've had the wonderful opportunity of assessing this for the last 20 years, more seriously the last 10 years. And while there are going to be emotions, it's time. It's time. And I don't think that there will be any way of subsiding or getting around the emotions that are going to be left. But still, I know it's time. And I think that the satisfying element here is the benefit that it will serve over many years many years, and it's going to serve those young people who are seeking education. I was not one who had the opportunity to have a higher learning, and education has always been so very important. And so I think that that really is one of the underlying factors in this. Plus, I just believe that this is God's will.
And that would take a tremendous amount of faith to make that move. And so as I talked about these things, each one of these people, I started looking at this PowerPoint and I was thinking, you know what? It's not just old people that have storms. There's probably some people like my sound guys up there. They may have some kind of thing that they're going through, but there may also be a child that has something going through. We have a program at our church, and I have a little girl, and her father has almost died twice this year. She's 6 years old. So people of all ages go through storms and need to depend on the Lord to get through those storms. But I wanted to share this one last thing with you. I know I'm probably over time. What is it? I'm okay. Okay. So this is a picture of my son, Joel Elmore. And Joel, when he was 22 years old, he was senior in college at Covenant College in Lookout Mountain, Georgia. And he called me and said, well, he called me like 8 or 9 times. I was in church. And so he couldn't stand up. He just kept falling down. And so anyways, I got into a car. I rushed to the hospital. He was already at the emergency room. But within 24 hours, he was completely paralyzed. I mean, he could not open his eyes. He was on a respirator. It was just a horrible, horrible thing. And so we didn't know it, but Joel could hear everything that people were saying, but he couldn't communicate back. And he was just, literally in the middle of a horrible, horrible, horrible storm. So I asked Joel this week, I said, Joel, do you think that storms, because he's in seminary now, I said, Joel, do you think that storms make people stronger? He said, some people are made stronger by storms, but some people just go after their own folly. That was the word he used. They go after their own folly. It never makes a difference in their lives. They become bitter or whatever. But he tried not to do that, and we were in the hospital for five months, and he went to Atlanta to Shepherd's, and he had to do everything from, learning to swallow again, to breathe again, to, he was in a wheelchair. He was in a sip and puff wheelchair. That's how he got around, just blowing this little straw to get around. And then he learned to stand up again, and it was a huge day when he was able to drink a Coke, because it's really hard to swallow Coke. And so Shepherd's Hospital tweeted it out, and then Coke tweeted it back out. So it was like this really, great thing. But in that picture, there was a picture of him running. So Joel, it took him a long time. He walked out of the hospital of Shepherd's with a walker. And then he kept in physical therapy. And so 2 years later, after all that time, he ran a 10K. And in that picture that it shows him, that's his physical therapist, because not only did, when he got back to Roanoke, in Roanoke they didn't have the kind of therapy that he needed at Carilion or Lewis Gale, so he had to go to Richmond for his therapy. So that's his therapist in Richmond, and she ran the 10K with him. And so I think this is another picture of sometimes we're in a storm. That's just a storm, but we need to keep our eyes on Jesus. We need to have faith and see if he doesn't bring us to the other side. And, God continue to use that. So hopefully my son will have a whole lot to give. I don't know if it'll be financial, but I know that he really wants to give back and help other people. So I thank you for letting me come today. If you had any questions, if you need to talk to anybody, this was very difficult to get this PowerPoint going and this video going. And so I really feel like that God must have had something to say to someone here. So if you're interested in the foundation, we can help you with wills, estates, any estate planning, trusts, donor advised funds, anything like that. We can help you manage your money for your church so you get a better return. Just whatever, But, I mean, the biggest thing that I just want to get across to that, even when we go through super tough times, and we all do, that it's important just to let God go ahead and do that work through us. And we're in our Bible study, our ladies' Bible, we're doing 1 Peter right now. And so right at the beginning of 1 Peter, he tells those people there who are being persecuted, Peter tells them, don't give in to it. Endure. Endure, just like gold in a fire. Endure. So that's the way I think that we should be. So I don't know where to go from here. What do y'all do next?
Thank you for sharing these great stories of faith. I invite you to stand with me as we think about living for Jesus through the sunny days and the stormy days, that consistency in faith and seeking ways to serve Him throughout our lives. This hymn reminds us of that. It's 372. I invite you to sing with me.
Thank
Cindy, thanks for coming today. I want to invite you, if you would make your way back towards the front door so folks can go by and introduce themselves and thank you themselves for being with us today in this service. I think if there was a theme that went through each of the stories that Cindy related to us, it would be people have a vision that was bigger than themselves. And I think as long as we're thinking bigger than ourselves, God is able to honor that, even if you don't know how it's going to be realized. You know, you think about it, the establishment of this congregation, the building of buildings, none of those things would have happened if people hadn't thought bigger than themselves and trusted God. So over these next few weeks, let's look deep inside ourselves and let's really do some self-examination about what God is calling you to do. Whether you're 16, 19, 25, 85, God is never done with you until he shakes your hand and says, well done, good and faithful servant, when that day dawns. God is not done with any of us. And to that end, I invite you to sing, Yes, Lord, Yes, as we go on our way today.